Channel Zero is a new horror anthology series on the Syfy channel. It began airing Tuesday, October 11th, and bases its stories off of well-known creepypastas. Every 6-episode season bases itself off a new pasta, and for the first season, they've decided to start off strong with Cove. Today I'll be covering the first episode, You Have to Go Inside. Our story begins with an interview of our main character, Mike Painter, author and child psychologist. This was my first indication that the people behind this really respected the source material. Because my first thought was, hey, isn't that a username from Cove? And it was. He's the one who reveals to the forum that Cove really didn't exist in the first place and it was just static. Oh yeah, there's spoilers for this episode, I guess. So it turns out this interview is just a dream sequence that foreshadows some pretty heavy psychological trauma. I'd like to point out that the camera work and editing are really effective throughout the whole episode, and this first scene is a good example of it, as we immediately cut to some sort of burning figure before just as quickly to Mike waking up. Mike has been avoiding his childhood home, a small town in Ohio, since he was young, and after this dream he decides to go back and visit his family and friends. They're all happy to see him, and one of his friends, the sheriff of the police department, Gary I think, asks him to come over to his house and see if something's up with his son. For the people who have read the story, this is a pretty good fake out because we immediately assume it has to do with Cove. But no, the kid just really likes David Bowie. And honestly, who could blame the kid? It turns out though, this is still the setup to introduce us to Cove, as the daughter is watching it as Mike walks through the living room. He asks all the people at the dinner table if they remember Cove, and we largely have a reenactment of the first part of the creepypasta. Some lines even adapted almost word for word. There are a couple changes. For instance, the skin taker has been renamed to Jawbone. I'm not sure why this is. Maybe they thought Skin Taker was too on the nose. Throughout the episode, we frequently get flashbacks of young Mike and his twin brother Eddie. This was a big red flag for me because there's quite a few child actors in this episode alone, but none of them stood out for me as bad. I'm honestly impressed because Syfy can barely even manage to get good adult actors for most of their TV movies. The acting overall is pretty solid, really. There weren't any standout moments for me, but it's never distracting and certainly never bad. Anyways, one particular flashback scene is pretty gruesome, as Eddie is confronting this bully who gets a bunch of his friends to get the jump on him and pretty brutally breaks his finger. This flashback side plot doesn't really go anywhere this episode, but it's clearly leading to a reveal about the background plot of a series of murders that took place. All children whose bodies had been found in the forest and their teeth had been removed. One of the victims being Eddie himself, whose body was actually never found. Eventually, the sheriff's daughter goes missing out of nowhere, and all of our characters scramble to find her. Mike tells one of his friends that he's convinced that Cove has something to do with it, as the show only aired in the few months that the murders took place, and now it suddenly airs again, just as the sheriff's daughter is nowhere to be found. It's here we get the revelation that Mike has just been released from a psych ward a couple days ago after carving something in his arm. I honestly couldn't read what it was. Sorry about that. The other characters think he's losing it and become suspicious that he knows something about what happened to her. He runs off before they can get the chance to basically interrogate him and ask the girl's brother, the David Bowie kid, if he knows anything about where she went. He says she mentioned the Crow's Nest, a place where Mike and Eddie used to play as kids. He runs off there and finds her. Some of her teeth are missing and scattered on the ground. After he gets her out of there, a horrible monster made out of teeth comes and eats the missing teeth. I have no idea what the fuck this thing is or what its relation to Cove is, but it scares the shit out of me. I feel really uncomfortable looking at this thing. This is a good monster, 10 out of 10. Anyways, he gets her back and all's well that ends well, except it doesn't really end well because everyone still suspects Mike of essentially kidnapping her or thinks that he at least had something to do with it. But that's for a later episode. He brings up Cove to his mom at the end of the episode, and she gives the reveal that he and his brother were watching Static the whole time. The episode ends on shots of kids in the present day watching the show, clearly foreshadowing even more death and tragedy. I really enjoyed this episode quite a bit. It wasn't perfect and there weren't really that many scary moments, but the ones that were scary were really great. And this is mostly an expository episode, so I can forgive it for not going overboard on the scares. I'm a little concerned about the story and the direction it's going to take. I feel like it might try to answer too many questions and make Cove too ominous or evil. In the original story, it was pretty clearly paranormal in some way, but aside from bad nightmares, nothing horrible ever came of it. No one certainly died. I do have high hopes though. This episode could have turned out a lot worse, and I think they did a pretty good job of adapting the source material. The characters didn't get much chance to be fleshed out or interact as much as I would like, aside from Mike himself, but that's okay, because we have 6 episodes to do that. I'm sure it won't be like, The Legend of Korra, where we go through 4 seasons, or The Walking Dead Season 2 game, where we go through 5 episodes, and have no characterization or development whatsoever. That would suck, because the character interactions were my favorite part of the original story. Anyways, go ahead and watch this if you haven't already. It's looking promising so far. I'll see you every week for each new episode, and I'll see you on Halloween for the biggest episode of the show so far. Happy October, everyone.